After the colonists declared their independence from England, they set about to establish the very first government. Now, while this government didn't exactly work out, it taught us a lot of things that we eventually later applied when we created the current system of government. Every nation needs a government. Once the former colonies had declared their independence and considered themselves a new country, they needed to create a government to rule their nation, even while they were still fighting the British. Before we talk about the first government, it's important to do a little review of some vocab terms. Try and match the term on the left with the definition on the right. There's unitary government, confederate government, and federal government. A unitary government matches with C, where the central government holds the most power. A confederate government is A, the state governments hold the most power, and a federal government is B, the state and central governments share power equally. Knowing how much the colonists hated being ruled by a king in England, which type of government do you think they were going to pick? Many Americans at the time felt that power should rest in the hands of individual states, that a strong central government would only put them in the same situation as they were under British rule. Based on that knowledge, which type of government do you think the colonists chose? Would they choose unitary, confederate, or federal? The answer is B, a confederate government. The first governing document the colonists created for their new nation was called the Articles of Confederation. The document, which was adopted by the Second Continental Congress, combined the states in a loose Confederate Union in which the majority of the power rested with the states. The 13 individual states did not wish to give up any of their sovereignty to the central government. Remember, sovereignty means the power to govern. The Articles created a unicameral legislature that had very few powers bestowed upon it. Remember, a legislature is the body of government that makes laws, and a unicameral legislature has only one house. You may recall previously that we've done a little bicycle analogy. Unicameral, one house, unicycle, one wheel. Bicameral is two houses, bicycle, two wheels. Under this new government, Congress had very few powers and many weaknesses. Congress could make war and peace. They could send and receive ambassadors, make treaties, coin money, borrow money, build a navy, fix universal standards, and settle disputes among the states. All powers that they still have today. But there were some weaknesses. For one, each state only had one vote, no matter how small or large they were. So Rhode Island had one vote, and Virginia had one vote. Congress was powerless to collect taxes or duties. How are you supposed to keep a government running without any money? They were also powerless to regulate foreign and interstate commerce. There was no executive, such as a president. There was no national court system. And they could only change the Constitution if every single one of the states agreed. They also needed a 9-13 majority to pass any laws. And the Articles were really just a firm league of friendship. That's right, a government based on friendship. Although the Articles had many flaws, the Confederation Congress did accomplish some important things in the early days. It created policies for how Western lands would be surveyed and organized into territories, and it established a process for how territories could enter the Union. This was important in the next century as the U.S. began to expand westward and add new territories. The Confederation Congress also brought the states together by creating a policy of full faith and credit, which we still use today. This means that each state would recognize legal acts of another state, and citizens of one state would be considered citizens of the entire United States. These ideas were later used in the writing of the Constitution. Then the problems began. The Revolutionary War ended in 1783. The Articles had already been in place for 6 years. And with the ending of the war came many struggles. Some of these new problems were too much for the weak Congress under the Articles. Individual states started creating their own laws regarding taxation, and they even printed their own currency. So each state had a different type of money. States refused to provide financial support to the central government. The economy was in bad shape after the war. Because the economy was not in good shape, prices began rising, debts were growing, and individuals did not have the money to pay off their debts. In some cases, violence even erupted. One such case happened in Massachusetts when a farmer and Revolutionary War veteran named Daniel Shays found himself in economic hard times, and he could not pay his debts. The government was going to foreclose on his property because of this, and he would not be able to make a living without his farmland. Yikes. Shay and many other Western Massachusetts farmers in a similar situation came together, armed themselves, and forced the closing of several courts in order to prevent the foreclosures. They wanted the state to pass laws allowing them to keep their farms under the Depression to work off their debts. You can't really pay off a debt if you don't have a business anymore. Authorities in Massachusetts responded by raising a small army to crush the movement, so Shay and 1,200 men headed for the federal arsenal in the city of Springfield. The state militia was there in Springfield to put down the rebellion. Shay's rebellion made an impact. It made clear to those in power that the articles were not working, and citizens were suffering and willing to resort to desperate acts of violence. The weak central government was not prepared to suppress such uprisings. Colonists began to demand a more powerful central government. Groups such as creditors, large property owners and merchants, or those in the upper class that were most threatened by this economic crisis, led the charge to strengthen the government. In order to address the weaknesses, a meeting was held in Philadelphia, and this became known as the Constitutional Convention.